This is section 4-2. This is proving that triangles are congruent by side, 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 and side, angle, side. So, if we remember from section 4-1, for two figures to be congruent, all corresponding parts must be congruent. So all sides and all angles must be congruent. But in this section, we're going to talk about some shortcuts that we can take. So one of them, and this is for triangles, one of them is that if we can show that three pairs of corresponding sides are congruent, then the triangles are congruent. So that's the side, side, side congruence. We can also show that if two pairs of corresponding sides and one pair of corresponding angles is congruent, then the triangles are congruent, and that's the side angle side congruence. So first up is postulate 4-1. This one is called the side, side, side postulate. So this one says that if three sides of one triangle are congruent to the three sides of another triangle, then the two triangles are congruent. So let's take a look at how we would apply this. Let's consider triangle ABC and DEF here. So from the diagram, I can take the information that AB is congruent to DE because of their markings here that tell me that they're congruent. I can also conclude that BC is congruent to EF, again because of their markings. And then I can conclude that AC is congruent to DF, again because of their markings. So, because I've shown that all three sides of my triangles are congruent, then my two triangles are congruent by side, side, side congruence. Let's take a look at an example here. So we have this figure. It's quadrilateral PLMN. Then we have this diagonal here that's cutting it into two triangles. So we have triangle PLN and triangle MNL. Our goal here is going to be to figure out if these two triangles are congruent. Well, let's start out. So I have PL and NM have these same markings here that tell me that they're congruent. So I can say that PL is congruent to NM. Awesome. Next, I have PN is congruent to LM because they also have the same markings. So PN is congruent to LM. Now here comes the tricky part. This is one where we get to use one of our equivalency properties. So if we look, both triangles share this segment here, LN, and I can say LN is congruent to LN by the reflexive property. We thought that reflexive property was never going to come in handy, but here it is. We've used it to show that the third side of both triangles are congruent because they're the same side. So now I have all three sides of one triangle are congruent to all three sides of the other triangle. So by side, 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 I can say that triangle PLN is congruent to triangle MNL. And notice that I kept them in the same order like we talked about in section 4-1. PL is congruent to MN. I have PN is congruent to LM. And then I have LN is congruent to LN. So notice that I kept them in the same order. Naming is important. Next up we have postulate 4-2, and this is the side angle side postulate. So postulate 4-2 says if two sides and the included angle of one triangle are congruent to two sides and the included angle of another triangle, the two triangles are congruent. So notice that I have kind of highlighted here the word included. What this means is that we have two sides, and their included angle is going to be the one that's basically between them. So this is their included angle. So I have a side, and then the included angle is the one between them. This is very important because we'll talk about it in later sections, but this is one particular type of congruence, the two sides and their included angle. We can't talk about these other angles out here yet. So again, if two sides in the included angle of one triangle are congruent to two sides in the included angle of another triangle, then the two triangles are congruent. So let's take a look at a diagram here. So I have AB is congruent to DE here because of their marking. So AB is congruent to DE because of their markings. And then if I look here, I have BC is congruent to EF, also because of their markings. So BC is congruent to EF because of their markings. And then we take a look here, angle B, angle E, these are both included angles, included between the sides that we're talking about. So angle B is congruent to angle E because of the markings. So then I can say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. And notice again I kept the same order with my letters. I went A, B, C, and D, E, F. So let's take a look at an example problem, and you're going to see a lot of figures like this in your problem solving for this chapter. So here we have triangle ABC and DEC, and we need to figure out if they are congruent. And notice that their last angle here is formed by two lines crossing. So here we have AC and CE are congruent because of their markings. So I have AC is congruent to CE. Awesome. Now, notice that BC is congruent to DC also because of their markings. BC is congruent to DC. And finally, I have a pair of vertical angles here. And I remember from previous sections that vertical angles are congruent, so I can say that angle ACB is congruent to angle ECD. So now I have two sides, and their included angle are congruent to two sides and the included angle of another triangle. So by side angle side congruence, I can say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEC. And notice again that I kept my letters in the right order. A, B, C to indicate that they correspond to each other, and D, E, C to indicate that they correspond. Now it's time to do some practice problems. So on these problems, you're going to look at a pair of triangles and you're going to decide whether we would use side, side, side or side, angle, side to prove that the triangles are congruent. And if there's not enough information, we can't prove that the triangles are congruent, then you just say not enough information. So let's take a look at our first pair of triangles. So go ahead and take a look at these and decide, can we show that these triangles are congruent? And if we can, would we do it using side, side, side or side, angle, side? So go ahead and pause the video, copy down the triangles, and write down your answer. Now that you've had a chance to look at these on your own, let's go over them together. So let's take a look. Here I have this side. It's congruent to this side because they have the same markings. And then I have this side is congruent to this side because they have the same markings. And then notice that these angles here are marked congruent. So I have two congruent sides, and then I have their included angle. It's the angle that's between the sides. Those are also congruent. So I can say these two triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. I can prove that these triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. That's side, angle, side. Alright, so let's consider this pair of triangles here. Your job is to decide if we can prove that these triangles are congruent, and if we can, are we going to use side, 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 or side, angle, side? So go ahead and pause the video, copy down the triangles, and write down your answer. Now that you've had a chance to work on it on your own, let's take a look at this together. So looking at this diagram, I notice that I have this side and this side are both marked as congruent. I also have this side and this side are congruent because of their markings, and finally I have this side here is congruent to this side also because of their markings. So I have 3 congruent sides, and so by side, 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 I can decide that these 2 triangles are congruent. Alright, time for our last practice problem. So we saw a diagram pretty similar to this earlier where we have 2 triangles that are partially formed by these intersecting lines here. So again, your job is to decide if this triangle is congruent to this triangle, and if it is, then you need to tell me if we can use side, side, side or side, angle, side to prove that they're congruent. So go ahead and copy down this diagram and then write down your answer. Now that you've had a chance to look at it on your own, we'll go over it together. So there are actually 2 different ways that I can look at this problem. The first one is I notice that this side here is congruent to this side here. They share the same markings. This side here is congruent to this side here. They also share the same markings. And this side here is congruent to this side here. They share the same markings. So I can already say that these 2 triangles are congruent by side, side, side. The 3 sides of this triangle are congruent to the 3 sides of this triangle. Also, though, notice that I have these 2 lines here that intersect, and they form a pair of vertical angles. And what do I know about vertical angles? Well, I know that they are congruent. So I have this angle is congruent to this angle, these sides are congruent, and these sides are congruent. So I have 2 sides and an included angle are congruent. So I can actually show that these 2 triangles are congruent by side, angle, side as well.